Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. 8 quiet months vanished the moment a silver Lexus crawled up my driveway. I'd left the chaos of federal work for 6 acres of freedom, but when a fake HOA queen tried to shake me down for 50 grand, she sparked a war she couldn't win. She picked the wrong man. 8 months. That's how long it took for the peace and quiet I'd worked so damn hard to buy to start cracking at the edges. When we moved out here, me, my wife Elise, and our mutt Jasper, I thought I'd finally found what most people spend their lives chasing: quiet woods. A 6-acre spread outside any municipal HOA nonsense, a house with bones, and land with lines that meant something. Clean titles, no liens, no bureaucratic busybodies with clipboards telling me what shade of beige my trim had to be. Just me, my family, and Colorado air thick with pine sap, and the kind of silence that heals a man. I hadn't planned on spending my early 40s doing security consulting for police departments, but retirement from the feds didn't sit right. So I still took contract work, mostly fraud analysis. Nothing glamorous, but enough to keep my brain sharp and bills paid. It wasn't exactly Langley, but then again, I didn't miss DC's stink of suits and political rot. It was a Tuesday when she showed up. Late morning, cool breeze rolling down from the foothills. I was on the porch sanding the old railing Elise wanted refinished before winter. That's when the Lexus, silver, spotless, suburban status symbol incarnate, nosed its way up the gravel drive like it owned the damn easement. She stepped out like she was storming a boardroom, tall, tense, and dressed in that particular kind of wrinkleless casual that screamed HOA president with a god complex. Blonde bob, clipboard tucked under one arm, and a smile that felt like it had been painted on with a chisel. "Mr. Grayson," she asked. "That's me," I said, brushing sawdust from my flannel. "I'm Karen Ellery, president of Timber Meadow Valley HOA. I'm afraid there's been a clerical oversight regarding your property." "Is that so?" I wasn't smiling. Jasper growled once and sat down by the stairs. Karen didn't miss a beat. "You see, according to our updated boundary documentation, your parcel actually falls within the purview of the HOA. Due to a filing delay, it wasn't reflected in the original registry when you closed, but it's since been corrected. You're technically a member, which means there are a few things we need to get in order." I stared at her for a second. "I've got the full parcel history in my office. This property's never been subject to HOA authority." "Oh, I'm sure that's what your title company told you," she said with a smile that made me itch. "But unfortunately, paperwork errors happen. The association has since reviewed the plat maps. You're in." "And what does being in entail?" Karen raised the clipboard like it was a damn holy book. "Well, first, you're responsible for monthly dues. That's $950 a month, so $7,600 for the past 8 months. Then we have compliance fees. Your perimeter fence doesn't meet aesthetic uniformity standards. That's a violation. And the exterior finish, you'll need to get approval retroactively or pay a fine. Oh, and the stream at the edge of your property? That falls under communal resource designation. You'll need to remove any fencing or blockades so the community can access it." "Hold on," I said. "You're telling me I owe over $50,000, need to tear down a fence I paid 10 grand to build, and hand over access to a creek that's on my deed?" Karen blinked slowly, as if she were dealing with a toddler throwing a tantrum over nap. "Time. I know this is a lot to process, but we're not unreasonable people. If you begin payments within 10 business days, we can waive some of the late fees." I chuckled, but there wasn't a drop of humor in it. "Karen, you're not getting a cent from me. This property isn't under any HOA jurisdiction. I sign nothing. I own every inch of this land outright, and I don't take kindly to strangers coming here talking about communal access to my water." Her face twitched, just a little, the way it does when someone doesn't follow the script they've rehearsed. "Well," she said, voice now clipped and frostbitten, "I hope you're ready for a legal process, Mr. Grayson. You're not the first to resist the HOA. But we always resolve things, one way or another." She turned on her designer heel, headed back to her Lexus, and paused, only to offer one last gem over her shoulder. "You really have no idea who you're dealing with." I watched her drive off, gravel popping under her tires like rifle fire, and I remember thinking, not fearfully, not even angrily, just with a sort of cold curiosity, "Lady, you just picked the wrong house on the wrong damn ridge. It was 2 days later, Thursday afternoon, just past 3. I'd just wrapped up a Zoom consult with a precinct in Pueblo, sorting through a money laundering case involving a construction nonprofit, standard smoke and mirrors shell corp stuff. The only thing I was planning to do for the rest of the day was get a late cup of coffee and maybe walk Jasper along the ridge trail behind the property. But fate had other ideas. I heard tires crunching on gravel again, slow and deliberate. I glanced out the window and saw the same silver Lexus pulling in, but this time, it wasn't alone. A dull gray crossover trailed it, and 2 figures stepped out. Karen, in a fitted pantsuit, like she was preparing to sue God himself, and a young man in a rumpled sweater vest, clutching a clipboard like it owed him rent. I sighed and stood up. Well, I muttered to myself, guess the HOA cavalry's here. Sitting at my dining table was Officer Elliot Brenner, friend, former colleague, and currently on assignment with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's Economic Crimes Unit. He had dropped by earlier to go over some documents I'd flagged about a shady HOA operation in Weld County. He looked up at the sound of the car doors. "You expecting company?" he asked. "Nope, but I've got a hunch who it is." I opened the door just as Karen stomped up the porch steps, dragging sweater vest behind her like a shadow that didn't want to exist. "Mr. Grayson," she said, not even waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." "Still not part of your HOA, Karen." She didn't even flinch, just pushed past me into my house. Her eyes darted around the room, making a mockery of politeness, then landed on Elliot. She blinked, paused, calculated. "And who are you?" she asked, tone immediately defensive. "Just a friend," Elliot replied calmly, not moving from his chair. "Here on personal time." Karen turned back to me. "Then this won't take long." I closed the door. "It already is." She opened her folder like a magician preparing a sleight of hand trick. "We're here to officially deliver a final notice of non-compliance. You are now in violation of multiple sections of the Timber Meadow Valley HOA Code. That includes unsanctioned fencing, non-conforming exterior finish, obstruction of communal natural resources, and failure to pay accrued dues. Based on HOA bylaws and our enforcement clause, we will begin the process of property lien placement within 5 business days. I crossed my arms. That's funny, considering you have 0 jurisdiction over this land. And even if you did, you just walked into my house without permission. That's trespassing, Karen. She actually had the gall to laugh. Don't be dramatic. We're here as representatives of a governing body. That grants certain leeways under civil code. I looked to Elliot, who hadn't said a word yet. He raised an eyebrow, clearly waiting to see just how deep she'd dig her own grave. Karen shoved a printed document toward me. "This is your HOA membership agreement, retroactively filed based on the developer's amended plat. As you'll see here, your property was included in the expansion filed last year." I took the paper and held it up to the light. It looked fresh off the printer, ink still sharp, no creases, no marks of notarization. The signature, supposedly from the previous owner, looked wrong. Not just fake, but clearly copied from public record. "I've seen forged 10Ks that looked more convincing," I muttered. That's when Elliot stood up. He moved with that slow, deliberate calm that made people instinctively sit up straighter. "Ma'am," he said evenly. "Karen Ellery, correct?" Karen turned to him, already rattled by his sudden shift in tone. "Yes?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out his badge. "Officer Elliot Brenner, Colorado Bureau of Investigation. You are currently attempting to enforce a legally unrecognized claim using what appears to be forged documentation. I am formally requesting that you surrender any and all materials related to your claim immediately." Karen's jaw actually dropped. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled the power plug. The clipboard trembled slightly in her grip. "What is this?" she stammered. "This is just a misunderstanding. We're following standard HOA protocol." "No, ma'am," Elliot cut in. "You're on private property, uninvited, presenting fraudulent legal threats, which may constitute criminal coercion and attempted extortion. You're going to hand over those papers now, or we can go a very different route." Her secretary, who looked like he'd rather be swallowed by the earth than remain in that room, stepped between us. "Maybe we should just go," he mumbled, eyes wide. Karen didn't move. Elliot took a step forward. "Now." She reached out stiffly, handed over the folder, and turned for the door in silence. The sweater vest guy followed, nearly tripping over the threshold on his way out. Neither of them looked back. As the cars pulled away down my drive, I looked at Elliot. "Well," I said, "that escalated." He exhaled, flipping through the documents. "This is a dumpster fire of bad forgery and weaponized bureaucracy. We may have something here, Miles. Something big." And standing there in my quiet living room, paper still warm from the laser printer, I had the sinking feeling this was only the beginning. After that afternoon, the calm never really came back. Elliot took the documents Karen left behind and ran them through his office for analysis. He said it'd take a few days, but even a glance told us everything we needed. These weren't just amateur fakes. They were strategic, designed to intimidate, printed to look official enough to scare someone who'd never read a real contract. Unfortunately, most people don't know the difference. I spent the next morning going over my own property records again. Title, plat maps, zoning, everything I'd checked before we bought the land. 6 acres registered before Timber Meadow Valley was even a concept sketch. No annexations. No HOA alignment. Crystal clear. If Karen was trying this scam on me, someone with a government background and a cop in the kitchen, I could only imagine what she'd done to people without that kind of defense. That's when I started making calls. The neighbors weren't exactly thrilled to talk at first. I got a lot of hesitant tones, a few abrupt hang-ups. But eventually I got through to a guy named Terry. Ex-military retired engineer, bought his house 2 years ago. "Yeah," he said slowly, when I brought up Karen. "She came to my place 4 months after we moved in, said we'd missed the voluntary onboarding window and now owed back dues. I paid. Didn't want trouble." "How much?" "11 grand. Took out of my savings. My wife still thinks it was legit." I felt my jaw clench. Terry wasn't the only one. There was a young couple with a newborn who'd paid nearly $8,000 in compliance fees after Karen sent them violation photos of their mailbox and garden lights. A widow named Judy told me Karen had shown up with a board vote authorizing liens against her house if she didn't sign a temporary HOA membership recognition form. None of them had actual documents from title or city zoning showing they were under HOA rule. But the intimidation worked. They paid, in fear, out of confusion, or because they just didn't want to deal with the fight. I started documenting everything. I wrote down names, amounts, dates, summaries of what people told me. Terry sent over copies of his notice of debt, which matched the format of the one Karen gave me. Same header, same fake registration number, same bad watermark that looked like someone photocopied a DMV form through a sock. When I showed Elliot the file, he just shook his head. "We're past bad apples," he said. "This is systemic fraud." We called the county sheriff. Sheriff Linderman was an older guy, straight shooter, gruff but not slow. When we met at his office, he brought his deputy and a county assessor. After Elliot laid out the situation, the sheriff just leaned back and muttered, "God damn HOA racketeering. That's a new one." They agreed to help. A joint inquiry was opened under the county's Economic Crimes Unit, and subpoenas were being drafted to obtain HOA's financials. But Karen had been careful. No legal incorporation beyond an old homeowner's charter. The HOA existed in name, not in legal standing, which meant she had no board oversight, no city registration, and no right to enforce anything. Her entire empire built on bluff. As more victims came forward, some quietly, others furiously, we discovered that Karen had even gone so far as to list properties for auction on the HOA's behalf. 2 homes, both belonging to retirees who owed dues, had been handed over to a third-party attorney. One she claimed was representing HOA interests. That attorney turned out to be her nephew, a paralegal. Not a single transfer had been recorded in the county deed office. But the owners didn't know that. They just saw a signed legal notice with a demand to vacate or face removal by Community Enforcement Services. I stared at the scans Elliot pulled from one of those notices. The logo at the top was a tree in a circle, probably lifted off Google Images, and the signature, K. Ellery, Chairwoman of Communal Oversight Division. Jesus, I muttered. She made up her own fake agency. Elliot didn't laugh. She's not just bluffing, she's escalating. This is going to get worse before it gets better. The county opened a hotline for complaints related to Timber Meadow Valley. Within 72 hours, it had over a dozen submissions, many with supporting documents. One man even claimed Karen had threatened to report him to zoning for animal cruelty because he raised chickens. His coop was legal, but he didn't know that. Fear makes people compliant. But not anymore. That weekend, I set up a bulletin board at the community mail kiosk. I posted a notice with my name, a burner email, and a message. If you were approached by Timber Meadow Valley HOA for any kind of payment, violation, or membership claim, contact me. This is not legal. We are investigating. By Sunday night, I had over 40 responses. And Karen, she hadn't shown her face once. By the time Monday rolled around, I had a stack of files thick enough to crush a lawyer's dreams. With the help of Elliot and the sheriff's office, we filed for a temporary restraining order against any enforcement actions from Timber Meadow Valley HOA, or more accurately, Karen and her Fantasy League of Authority. It was approved almost immediately. The judge even added an emergency clause. No individual representing the HOA may contact residents for the purposes of collection, property inspection, or compliance notices until the legality of the organization is clarified in court. It was the first of many dominoes to fall. Karen must have sensed things were shifting, because on Tuesday I got a letter hand-delivered to my mailbox. No return address, but that smell of smugness was unmistakable. Inside was a 2-sentence note typed in 14-point Comic Sans. Of all things, we regret the misunderstanding and are open to resolving this matter amicably. Please contact HOA counsel to arrange a settlement. It wasn't even signed. I didn't reply. Instead, I handed it over to Elliot, who chuckled and added it to our file under panic responses. By Wednesday, subpoenas were flying. The sheriff's department hit Karen's residence with a civil investigative demand, requesting all internal HOA documentation, bank records, communications, board minutes, if any existed, and formal registration papers. Elliot already knew what we'd find, or rather, what we wouldn't. Meanwhile, I was summoned to testify at a preliminary hearing to determine if the restraining order should be extended. Karen showed up, flanked by a man in a tight-fitting blazer who looked more like a real estate agent than an attorney. She wore her usual power lipstick and victimhood combo, and when I saw her glance at the judge like she was about to charm her way out of this, I knew it was going to be fun. The hearing lasted all of 30 minutes. My lawyer, a sharp, dry woman named Valerie who could spot BS from orbit, handed over our evidence without fanfare, the plat maps, the clean title, zoning records, and digital forensics proving that the membership agreements Karen had distributed were produced in the last 4 months and featured digitally lifted signatures from public real estate archives. Then she dropped the bomb, an email thread uncovered by Elliot's warrant to the HOA's supposed Gmail account. It was short, just 3 lines, but it was all we needed. From Karen.Ellery.HOA to Boardsec.Tem Valley, subject Miles Grayson. Miles lives on a gold mine. The creek gives us direct access to where that developer wants the park extension. If we can pressure him with fines and dues, he'll fold. We force compliance, then offer a buyout through the City Parks Initiative. Easy. The courtroom went still. Karen's lawyer, if he even was a lawyer, started whispering something urgent, but Karen just sat frozen, mouth slightly open, color gone. The judge leaned forward. "Is this verified?" Valerie nodded. Header confirmed. IP traces to Karen Ellery's home network. Attached metadata logs available. The restraining order became permanent on the spot. The judge even added a clause requiring Karen to cease all contact with any residents of Timber Meadow Valley pending further investigation. But that wasn't the end of it. The county prosecutor, having been present for the hearing, requested a sidebar with the judge. When they returned, the judge announced that the case would be forwarded to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. Karen tried to protest, something about being misunderstood in community preservation, but the judge shut her down. "I suggest you retain competent counsel, Ms. Ellery," she said, "because at this point, the question isn't whether you overstepped, it's whether you committed felony fraud." After the session, I walked out into the brisk afternoon air, papers still clutched in hand. Elliot met me on the courthouse steps. "She didn't see it coming," he said, nodding toward the doors. "She thought she was running a PTA bake sale, not a criminal enterprise." "She still thinks she's in control," I said. "But now, she's on our field." And from that moment forward, the rules had changed. This wasn't just about defending property anymore. It was about exposing everything. By the end of the week, Timber Meadow Valley HOA existed in name only. The investigation, now formally backed by the district attorney's office, turned Karen's suburban fiefdom inside out. And what they found, It wasn't a simple case of a pushy neighborhood president going rogue. It was a fully functioning, soft-shell racketeering operation hiding behind white picket fences and community potlucks. We started with the basics, or what should have been the basics. There were no corporate filings, no tax ID number, no state registration, not even a city record confirming the HOA's existence beyond a handwritten charter drawn up by the original developer 15 years ago. A developer who, by the way, had since declared bankruptcy and moved to Arizona. Timber Meadow Valley was never legally updated. There were no annexation filings, no voting records, no meeting logs. But that didn't stop Karen from operating like she was running a Fortune 500 branch office. Elliot and the sheriff's team pulled financials from a community bank in Fort Collins, accounts labeled TMV Civic Trust, HOA General Maintenance, and, my personal favorite, Beautification and Compliance Holdings. The signature on all of them? Karen Ellery. The second authorized signer, her daughter, a sophomore at Colorado State. Together, over $120,000 in dues and violation fees had been deposited into those accounts over the past 2 years. Of that, more than half had been transferred to personal accounts or used for contracted services, mostly untraceable Venmo and Zelle transfers to names suspiciously similar to relatives. When the DA's team subpoenaed the renovation contracts tied to Karen's home remodel, new deck, re-roofing, solar panel install, guess what? Those invoices were paid from the HOA beautification account. She literally used fence fines from her neighbors to buy herself a pergola. But the real turning point came when two former board members, Kevin and Dana, came forward. Kevin was a nervous guy, mid-40s with a paper trail of HOA meeting emails that all ended with the phrase, Karen said not to worry about the vote. When we met at a cafe off Route 34, he kept checking the door. I didn't know it was illegal, he insisted. She said we were grandfathered in, that as long as we had homeowner consensus and enforced community standards, we were in the clear. Did you ever see proof of that? I asked. No, he admitted. But when I questioned it, she threatened to take my landscaping business off the approved vendor list. Classic Karen. Dana, on the other hand, came in swinging. She'd quit the board 6 months earlier and clearly had an axe to grind. She brought with her screenshots, messages from a private group chat between Karen and her inner circle, saved before she left. Most were harmless gossip, but some need to hit that new couple with something. Start with mailbox violations and work up to structural. They'll pay just to avoid the headache. Grayson's too confident, probably ex-law. Gonna need something scarier than late fees. Tell Kevin to back off or he's next. HOA can make his life hell if we want. Elliot looked up from the transcript and said what I was thinking. This is more than just fraud. This is targeted extortion. With that, we pushed for interviews with every resident who had ever paid a fee, received a notice, or had a lien threatened. The numbers kept rising. People had been quietly bleeding out. $1,000 here, $3,000 there. Some were retirees. Others were new families, too overwhelmed to question it. One couple had tried to fight back months earlier, only to receive a visit from Karen's so-called compliance inspectors, who turned out to be her cousin and a guy from her daughter's dorm. They knocked on the door wearing HOA badges printed from Staples and threatened to call code enforcement if steps weren't taken. The couple caved. What made it worse was how smoothly Karen had trained her crew. Everything looked just real enough. Slightly off logos, phone numbers that redirected to voicemail inboxes with robotic menu options, violation slips with policy reference numbers that meant nothing but looked official. It was HOA theater, and the audience had bought in. Now, the curtain was finally dropping. At the end of that week, I got a call from Valerie, my lawyer. "You're going to love this," she said. "We just got the boundary confirmation from the county zoning office. And Timber Meadow Valley's jurisdiction ends 516 feet from your property line. You're not just not in the HOA. You're in a completely separate zoning district." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I might have screamed. Karen didn't just overreach. She invented an empire and ran it like a CEO with no board, no brakes, and no clue what law actually looks like. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Now it was the prosecutors. It started with a knock, not on my door, on hers. At precisely 7:12 a.m., two unmarked vehicles rolled up to the beige Colonial at the end of Juniper Ridge Lane. Karen's house, neat lawn, 2 ceramic garden gnomes. A flagpole with the HOA's custom logo still waving like a delusional declaration of sovereignty. She didn't answer at first. Elliot told me later it took them 2 full minutes of knocking and a verbal warning through the intercom before she opened the door. Bathrobe, no makeup. The mask cracked before she even knew the cameras were rolling. They had a warrant. 2, actually. 1 for the house, 1 for her personal storage unit across town, which she'd rented under the name KE Consulting. You can guess how legit that was. Inside the house, they found more than just fake HOA stationery. Elliot called me that afternoon, and I could hear the edge of disbelief in his voice. She kept a full paper trail, he said. This wasn't sloppiness. It was arrogance. There were printed membership agreements with placeholder names and fake addresses ready to be customized and deployed. A digital template for violation notices, complete with a drop-down menu for offenses like non-standard roof shingles and unauthorized lawn decor. A custom-made HOA stamp with a fraudulent seal. Not legal, not registered, just designed to look intimidating. But the real kicker, a handwritten ledger, not digital, not encrypted, just a spiral notebook labeled processing and conversion. Inside, pages of resident names, amounts paid, the source of the violation, and cryptic notes like Terry, old vet, scared, paid fast. Judy, pushing back, send cousin again. Grayson. Dangerous. Watch him. Fence may trigger legal. Park dev wants stream. Leverage required. At the bottom of several pages, she had tallied what she referred to as recov percent, short for recovered percent of potential yield. She was calculating return on investment per household. They also found a manila folder marked zoning loopholes, filled with printed PDFs from real estate law forums, Reddit threads, and ChatGPT outputs. And I'm not even kidding. It was part criminal operation, part deranged Pinterest board. At the same time, the unit across town was cracked open. Inside, backup folders, receipt boxes, an inkjet printer, laminating sheets, and an entire crate labeled badges. Inside that crate, over 30 printed name tags and ID cards for roles like HOA enforcement officer, community adjudicator, violation, inspector, and neighborhood sanitation authority. Half of them had Karen's face. Half had her daughter's. By 3 p.m., Karen was in cuffs. They didn't make a scene, didn't parade her in front of the neighborhood. She was escorted to an unmarked cruiser quietly, professionally, like just another middle-aged woman who got caught shoplifting at Target. Except she wasn't stealing lipstick. She'd stolen tens of thousands in fake fees and peace of mind. The arrest report listed fraud, multiple counts, forgery of legal documents, criminal impersonation of public officials, trespassing and unlawful entry, extortion and coercion, and unlawful interference with private property. Later, when the news broke, the official press release described it as a multifaceted scheme of community manipulation with the intent to extract funds through fraudulent authority. But that was the DA's version. Mine was simpler. She tried to run a kingdom, and the townspeople finally revolted. I watched the news that evening with Elise. They played aerial shots of the property. Karen's deck, the one she paid for with fake landscaping fines, was bathed in flashing red and blue. Her lawyer released a statement claiming she was committed to resolving misunderstandings in good faith. The DA filed a motion to freeze her assets pending seizure. That included the house, the accounts, and the HOA's fake budget surplus. The judge signed it within 24 hours. By Friday, the flagpole out front was bare. No more HOA flag, just a naked pole in the wind. Karen's name disappeared from the Timber Meadow Valley newsletter within 72 hours of her arrest. The HOA, such as it was, officially collapsed on Monday morning. There was no vote, no emergency board meeting. There wasn't even a goodbye email. One by one, the remaining board members either resigned, cooperated with the investigation, or flat out vanished. Kevin, the nervous landscaper, gave a statement to local reporters. "We were misled, we were scared, and we're sorry." Public sympathy was mixed. Some people had quietly gone along with the HOA because it kept their lawns mowed and trash cans hidden. Others were furious, not just about the money, but about being manipulated, humiliated, and controlled by a woman with a god complex and a collection of fraudulent job titles. As for the victims, we weren't sitting quietly. Terry, the veteran who paid over 11 grand out of fear, was the first to contact a civil attorney. I referred him to Valerie, my own lawyer, who had already filed a civil claim for fraud, emotional distress, and unlawful debt collection on my behalf. It didn't take long for others to join. Within 10 days, a class action suit had formed. 15 plaintiffs, then 22, then 31. Valerie was working pro bono for most of them, coordinating with another firm who saw the case as a public interest landmark. And the evidence? Overwhelming. Screenshots, emails, fake documents, bank records, testimony from whistleblowers, even doorbell camera footage showing Karen dropping off final warnings in the middle of the night, wearing what looks suspiciously like a security vest from Walmart, with a homemade HOA badge clipped to the front. Public opinion turned fast. The local media caught wind, and soon I found myself on a folding chair in front of a camera truck, giving a statement while Jasper dozed behind me in the grass. I kept it short. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about safety. It was about control, and when control turns into fraud, somebody needs to shut it down. A week later, the footage aired under the segment title, HOA or Hostage? Suburban Fraud in Timber Meadow Valley. The fallout didn't stop there. Karen's house, once the centerpiece of her suburban regime, was now part of the civil seizure process. The DA moved quickly. A judge approved the auction, with proceeds earmarked for victim compensation. Turns out that solar upgrade and deck extension she paid for with other people's fines. Now it was being liquidated to reimburse those same people. Terry was the first to receive a payment. Valerie handed him a check for $8,400. Not the full amount, but enough to repair the damage and pay off the credit card he'd used to keep his utilities running that winter. I got mine a few days later. Not a full recovery because I never paid her anything, but the court awarded me damages for attempted coercion, and Valerie made sure Karen's beautification budget paid for my court fees. Meanwhile, the neighborhood changed. With the HOA gone, people expected chaos. Lawns overgrown, mailboxes toppled, anarchy. Instead, something unexpected happened. People started talking. Folks who hadn't looked each other in the eye in months began showing up at each other's porches. Community grills popped up. A group formed to handle trash pickup, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Someone planted flowers around the mailbox kiosk. Kids rode their bikes again without getting fined for noise disruption. The soul of the place had returned, and for the first time, it actually felt like a neighborhood. As for Karen, she sat in county jail awaiting her next hearing. Her lawyer released statements about stress-related decisions and misunderstood civic intentions, but no one was buying it. Her face was still in the news, but now it appeared under headlines like Suburban Queen Pin Faces 18 Counts of Fraud and Fake HOA Crumbles After Resident Fights Back. People started calling me the guy who took down the HOA. I hated the label, but I didn't correct them. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. I sat near the back, coat off, coffee cooling in my hand. Valerie was up front at the plaintiff's table, calm as ever. Elliot had flown back in for the sentencing. He nodded at me when I walked in, expression unreadable. Karen stood before the judge in a blue suit that didn't fit right and heels that didn't match. Her once perfect hair was flat and dull, and the spark that used to flash behind her threats had long since burned out. She pled guilty. Not to everything. Her lawyers negotiated a deal, but enough. 6 felony counts stuck. Fraud, forgery, criminal impersonation, coercion, unlawful interference with property, and misappropriation of funds. The judge didn't sugarcoat anything. Your conduct, she said, was not only criminal, it was corrosive. You used the illusion of authority to extract money, instill fear, and manipulate an entire neighborhood. This was not community service. It was domination through deception. And with that, she sentenced Karen Ellery to 6 years in state prison with parole eligibility. After 4, her daughter was cleared. Too young, too peripheral. The court ordered the sale of Karen's home and froze her remaining assets. Her Lexus was auctioned. The money went into the Victim Restitution Fund. What couldn't be returned financially was at least acknowledged, and that mattered more to some than the checks. When Karen was led away, she didn't look at anyone. Not me. Not Elliot. Not even the people she'd once called her community. That was the end of the Timber Meadow Valley HOA, but it wasn't the end of us. In the months that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Not perfectly. We still argued about noise, and some fences still leaned. But something had shifted, not just in how people acted, but in how they belonged. A few of the more level-headed residents started a voluntary council, purely advisory, no dues, no fines, just neighbors helping neighbors. I agreed to look over the financial planning. We printed the charter on a single sheet of paper and stuck it to the side of the kiosk with duct tape. No badges, no secret bylaws, just transparency. Elise and I expanded the fence along the south edge, nothing fancy. Cedar posts. Good line of sight to the creek. I added a sign, not because I needed one, but because I wanted the message to be clear. It read, "Private property. Enter with debts. Leave with cuffs." Elliot laughed when he saw it. "You should trademark that," he said. "Could be a whole merch line." "Don't tempt me," I told him. We grilled steaks that night, just the two of us on the deck, Jasper curled up under the table. The wind was cold, but the beer was warm and the silence felt earned. Elliot raised a glass toward the woods. "To the hottest cases starting in your kitchen," he said with a grin. I clinked his glass. To the day HOA stood for hell of an arrest.